And we're going to continue our exploration of how we can support this evolution in our imagination and move on to the question of museums. And we're going to begin by listening to Laure Ménétrier, who is director of the Museum of Champagne Wine in Epernay. Hello, everybody, and I'm delighted to be with you here today. Thank you, Véronique, for mentioning Champagne in 1735 at Versailles. Thank you to the organisers of the event and the director of the Cité du Vin, Philippe Massol, and Philippe Hernandez, Mélanie Paris, and Adèle Deschenaux for organising today. I was asked to give a presentation on the role of a wine museum, a heritage, cultural, tourist organisation, its place as a partner of the wine-growing sector. It will be in three parts. I'm going to begin by presenting the context, the museum I've been managing for 6 years, the Museum of Champagne and Regional Archaeology in Epernay. Then I'm going to give you some examples to show this cultural policy of wine museums as partners of the wine-growing sector, and also present then a project in the Champagne region, a partnership which gave rise to an original project of a travelling exhibition on the history of the grape varieties in Champagne. So I am going to be speaking as a director and curator of a museum today to talk about museums. I'm also going to be very pragmatic and practical, and I want to share the questions I have, the ideas, the doubts I have, the questions I ask myself when I get up, sometimes in the morning, when one is a director or curator of a wine museum. I'm going to try to be optimistic. So for 6 years, I've been managing a museum in Epernay, the Museum of Champagne Wine and Regional Archaeology. So it's the heir to several museums, which were all brought together in a single building, Château Perrier, that you can see here, the former home of a champagne trader. The museums were brought together here in the 1950s, closed in the 90s, to give rise to a new project to bring together all these museums, which took shape in the 2010s, where they designed the museum project. That took about 10 years. Then they worked on the renovation of this building between 2018 and 2020, and the new museum opened on the 29th of May 2021 after more than 22 years of being closed. So just to explain, this museum is in Avenue de Champagne, which is one of the key sites of the UNESCO listed site of the hillsides and Maison of Champagne. We have some of the leading champagne houses which are located here in a building which is a listed historic monument, and we have the Museums of France label, a label which is awarded by the Ministry for Culture with as defined in the Heritage Code. It's a museum with collections of which are very varied. I'm just going to be talking about the vine and wine part today, but there's also archaeology, fine arts, paleontology, non-European arts, very different subjects, but it tells the history of this territory of Champagne. It's a museum which today, not counting private events, has 40 to 50,000 visitors a year. And here you have some photographs of the part of the museum on champagne wines. I won't go into detail. You have time, you can read here the different things you can see in this part of the museum. And this is all placed in context with a number of different exhibits, with a very active type of visit, with lots of hands-on experiences to understand understand riddling in Champagne, lots of videos, interviews with different stakeholders in Champagne, multimedia exhibits. So you have also a table of aromas and lots of bottles of champagne. So a very interesting tour on the history of the Champagne wine economy and more. And now the link between the wine museum and the wine sector. So first of all, what is a museum? So this may remind you of things when you were children, when your parents or grandparents dragged you into museums where you were always bored. And here I will quote two people I heard yesterday during the inauguration of the exhibition and this morning. So I heard yesterday evening that Cité du Vin is much more than a museum because it's a living place of dialogue. And this morning I heard that we don't want to end up being a museum exhibit. And I wasn't offended by what you said, but a museum exhibit doesn't necessarily change very much, but it still has a lot to tell. It is alive, it speaks, it embodies something. It converses with the present, past, and future. And I'm going to try to prove that a museum is a very living place and that we can do something with this. So here we have a definition which was adopted 3 years ago by the International Council for Museums, at the service. A museum is at the service of society, research, collection, interpretation, encouraging diversity, sustainability, being accessible, being inclusive, and offering the public varied experiences of education, entertainment, and sharing knowledge. So a museum is many different things. There's a scientific dimension, that's the first dimension, with collections of objects to keep this heritage and enrich it, add to it. That's the first reason museums exist. And as the cultural and educational dimension, all of this has to be shared. We interpret this heritage in different ways, through exhibitions, through immersive experiences, through games, through virtual reality, through creative workshops. There's all different ways of sharing this heritage in intelligent, pleasant ways. And then museums also are key economic stakeholders. They take part in economic life. They contribute to the reputation of a region. Just to give you two figures regarding tourism in France, we estimate that wine tourism generates 7 to 10 billion euros turnover each year, and cultural heritage, and obviously the two are sometimes combined, it's between somewhere around 15 billion euros. So they're quite considerable sums. So a museum reconciles many different roles, activities, audiences. It's a bit like university, if you like, but also serving as a media library and also as a tourist attraction. And for some time, museums have really been placing themselves at the service of society to be genuine, active players in society to contribute to our human communities. So there are museums like Les Confluences in Lyon, Mucem in Marseille, Quai Branly in Paris, which address questions of society, of the environment, of the economy. And in this context, as a manager of a wine museum in France, I asked myself the question of our role as a museum. And there are also the questions of the differences between museums and interpretation centres, but also our role as partners of the wine sector. So that's the question here. So what do I do with this old wine-growing heritage, and how can this fit in with the questions facing the sector today, and how can this heritage drive regional development, and how can I help the audience, the 40 to 50,000 visitors each year who come to see us, many of them international? How can I get these people not only to listen to the story we have to tell, but also to raise the awareness of the questions facing the sector, and notably the champagne sector, questions of decarbonization of winemaking, or issues of the new consumption trends, new tendencies that we've been mentioning since this morning. So how do we do all of this? To give you just a few examples, I'm going to, and you have two photographs of this on the right, of how we can address these things as the Cité du Vin does through our cultural program, organizing events combining heritage and this societal role of museums. So at the top you have a conference there we organized with INRAP last year in Epernay about how science, and here the archaeology and social sciences can help the wine sector through their research. For example, when we're studying the geomorphology of soils or the erosion of soils, this can be interesting for wine producers. When we're looking at studying hillsides and soil erosion, we also talked a lot about the genetics of grape varieties, working on the genealogy of the grape varieties, and in archaeology we discover a lot of things. There's a big exhibition in Troyes at the moment on a Celtic tomb where we found residues in containers, and this can provide a trace of the genetics of the grape varieties, and this can be interesting for today and the future for innovations in grape varieties. So that was a conference which brought together at the museum the different disciplines, scientific disciplines, the partners, and the general public. Another example here is that we have monthly conferences where we try to address these different themes. And here I mentioned Christelle Leprel, who came to see us to talk about new consumption habits and the place of wine in society. Also, Aurélie Melin, who came to talk to us about the place of women in the wine sector and the feminization of the champagne wine sector. And other examples that come to mind are 2 years ago, we had a fashion show of wine-growing clothes for women. So as a sort of fashion show in the museum on the theme of how can we design professional clothing for women who work in the vines or in the vat houses or in the cellars. In the past, the women would often wear men's clothes in a smaller size, but we don't necessarily have exactly the same morphology. So there's this whole question of the professional work clothing through this fashion show. And another example I wanted to mention was, for example, during the Vignoble Ancienne event, one weekend a year in October, we presented the different professions related to the world of champagne to show how they work on limiting their carbon footprint by working on new materials, new processes. We talked about glass for bottles, the corks as well. So these are things which aren't currently in our permanent exhibition, but subjects we address through our cultural program, so that passing visitors discover not only the history of champagne and its wine growing and don't just taste the champagne, but can also have their awareness raised or be more aware of these contemporary issues. So, having said this, all these questions of how the champagne wine sector can roll out a strategy for climate change, these questions aren't addressed in our exhibition, which is an issue for me, and so I also try to work on addressing these subjects with visitors through a partnership with the interprofessional organization for Champagne, the Champagne Committee, which gave us an opportunity to share these concerns, and that's what I'm going to share with you now. So I contacted the Champagne Committee to sign an original partnership to create an exhibition, a traveling exhibition, Vines in Champagne, Innovation and Grape Varieties, a collective adventure on the grape varieties of Champagne and innovations in the grape varieties, an essential subject for the wine-growing sector, which seems relevant, an issue that can be shared with visitors to the museum. It's perhaps a subject they're not very aware of. So I'm going to talk now about the preparation and the expectations as regards to this exhibition. The partnership was signed in March 2024 between the city of Epernay, the Champagne Committee, and the Champagne Association to design and co-produce the exhibition. Inaugurated in March 2025 by Christine Mazy, Mayor of Epernay, and the co-presidents of the Champagne Committee. And so that was the first focus. The second was scientific mediation, work relating to the exhibition. And the third focus of the partnership for the future, which we'll be working with the Champagne Committee in 2026 and 2027, is turning to the interprofessional organization to incorporate its expertise into the exhibition. So what is this exhibition? So it's a sort of heritage project, but also a way of sharing scientific and technical knowledge, financed by the Champagne Committee, the result of a shared determination to promote this agricultural and technical heritage of the grape varieties in Champagne. And it's the first time a museum has joined forces with an interprofessional wine organization to present the results of contemporary research on the creation of disease-resistant or climate-resistant grape varieties. So this was seen as a scientific exhibition at the service of innovation, the aim being not only to show a timeline of the grape varieties in Champagne, so a timeline especially from the phylloxera crisis onwards, but also to show the historic, economic and biological mechanisms that have guided the plantation of today's vineyards in Champagne. And what's interesting here is that this collective effort was a way of documenting the history of the appellation through its raw materials, through the plants themselves. So there were four main guidelines here, for main aims for the exhibition to guide the creation. We wanted a traveling exhibition beginning at the museum in Epernay, but then traveling around the Champagne appellation and perhaps beyond, designed as a mobile exhibit with several modules which can be transported and assembled on the same day by any team without prior training. Even I can do it. And there is also an additional module which can be added to go into more detail in the subject, and we can also add a tasting exhibit for if we want to taste the new varieties, which can be adapted to the layout of different spaces or venues or different audiences. We need 70 to 100 square meters in order to organize the exhibition. It also needed to be open to a broad and varied audience by bringing, it's not, as a museum and as an interprofessional organization, we don't necessarily have the same target audiences. For me, I'm perhaps more interested in people who want to discover the process of Champagne and to inspire them, but people who might not be thinking so much about the plants themselves. So to reach a broad national and international audience, and for the interprofessional organization, they're interested in addressing the professionals or future professionals who may be working in the sector. Then also we wanted it to be entertaining, attractive and active, participatory. There is some text which we've tried to keep to a minimum. So the text, there's still a certain amount of text, but around those texts, we've also tried to have exhibits which are as entertaining and hands-on as possible to make things accessible to people. I don't know what we have here. So we have here a game on the old and new names of the grape varieties, because there were a lot of grape varieties before the appellations really were created. There were far more varieties in the past. And to look at the different names used for the different varieties at different times. Then we have quite a lot of videos. I'm not sure I have them here. Here, there's a film showing the Moët et Chandon wine-growing school back in the days of the phylloxera crisis, to understand what Olivier was talking about earlier, about how the wine growers learned their profession, again, how to do grafting, etc. Then a video in this exhibition who shows us how to defend the vines against viruses. So a lot, there's also videos, audio recordings, and the final part is promoting the heritage we have, which we found from the Museum of the Champagne Committee and from other museums. Here you have a very interesting document at the bottom there. You have a calcimetric map back in the days when they had to uproot and replant the vines. They had to choose the rootstock and which rootstock would be best adapted to the different types of soils, and notably limestone or chalk soils, to avoid chlorosis or other diseases of the vine. And so they studied the soils of all the wine-growing areas. You have all the different hamlets and places which are mentioned with the chalk content of the soils in the different places. So that's the map at the bottom here. So so it's a traveling exhibition. That's a key aspect. At the moment, it's in an agricultural school, and it will be heading off to the Aube region soon. I don't know if I've finished here. Yeah, just very quickly, to finish talking about the exhibition. We have 6 main themes: Champagne pre-phylloxera, the phylloxera crisis, the collective response to this, rebuilding the vineyards, the clonal selection for today's Champagne varieties, the innovations in grape varieties of the past 30 years, and the work underway in Champagne to prepare for the grape varieties of the future. So I wanted to talk about the exhibition because I think what's important here is to have the different views of people, the professionals, the museum people, the general public, to analyze our history so that they can also inform the present. And it's an exhibition which also can promote the professions in the sector. And the exhibition won a prize for the promotion of the wine-growing heritage in 2025, and we have to find a date so that they can give us that prize. So in conclusion, culture as a support for the sector. What is the role of museums? So my initial outline of an answer is how, with all these different objectives and roles as a museum, can we find our place and combine serious scientific research with also being attractive, fun, and glamorous, and also being economically viable at the same time, and finding our place in the wine, tourism, and economic sector more generally, and also being a reliable, recognized partner that can be useful for the wine sector. And this brings me back to the definition of a museum and its multiple types of activity. I think it's important that we do promote this plural identity and do combine all the different roles. We do collect knowledge and tangible traces of that knowledge. We're constantly trying to see how we can share the challenges of the sector with the public who aren't aware of the issues the sector might be facing, to talk about organic agriculture or whether we can have sheep grazing in the vineyards or other questions. So really to assert our role in society, reminding people of the links between human activity and the sustainable use of resources. And most importantly, and at all times, we need to think and ask ourselves questions and to take a step back to look at the big picture, not only focus on the details. And I'm lucky enough to have a museum which isn't just about vine and wine. So we do have lots of partners with their own very different concerns. So to take a step back and to look at the broader picture and to finish, I cannot resist the temptation. I think this must be my last slide. Just to try to present the exhibition currently on in our exhibition in Champagne. I'm going to finish with a quotation. I am very fascinated by a great gentleman who, from the world of museums, who worked in pretty much all of the museums of France and around the world, including the Museum of Aquitaine in Bordeaux, the Museum of Wine in Burgundy and others, and the Museum of Wine in Epernay, and who was the first and also the ancestor of the MUSEM, one of the founders of the ICOM as well, Georges-Henri Vierte. And he said about museums, this obviously isn't specific to the wine sector, what I'm saying here, but it seems important when we're talking about culture. What is the point of culture in the face of today's prevailing economic pressure? He said, imagining he was talking to a little girl, and this was back in 1978. You see, little girl, the success of a museum isn't measured in terms of the number of museums, of number of visitors, but the number of people it has taught something to, not the number of objects it shows, but the number of objects or items which may have been perceived by the visitors in the human environment. It's not measured by its size, but by the quantity of space that the public can reasonably visit to draw benefit from this. That's a museum. Otherwise, it's just a sort of cultural abattoir which turns us all into sausage meat.
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation très vivante, ce plaidoyer même très vivant pour le monde des musées. Merci.